When an empath finally stops trying to please everyone and begins to see reality as it is, something remarkable happens. Something Carl Jung deeply studied. They don't become selfish. They become dangerous. Not in a way that harms others, but in a way that threatens every system that thrives on their constant self-sacrifice. Jung called this transformation individuation, and it represents the most powerful shift an empath can experience in a world built on their endless giving. Picture the exact moment this change begins. You're sitting alone, maybe after another draining day spent managing everyone else's emotions. Once again, you said yes when your heart screamed no. You smiled through your own pain just to keep others comfortable. You absorbed everyone's tension until your body felt like it was burning from within. But this time, something inside you changes. Instead of pushing yourself to keep going, you stop. You ask one quiet, radical question. What if I stopped? That single thought marks what Jung described as the beginning of consciousness. And for the empath who dares to answer it truthfully, there is no going back. Yet here's what most never realize about Jung's insight. The empath's ability to feel everything isn't really a gift. It's what I call survival sensitivity, a trauma response cleverly disguised as compassion. Jung noticed this same pattern over and over in his patients. He wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But empaths can't fully do that until they learn who they are apart from other people's emotions. Here's what truly unfolds in that first awakening. The empath doesn't gently grow more self-aware. It's more like what Jung called a collision with the unconscious. A sudden, shattering recognition that their whole identity has been built on a lie. The belief that they are responsible for everyone else's feelings. Jung documented this exact phenomenon in his work on individuation. He found that highly sensitive people often develop what he referred to as inflated compassion. They become dependent on being needed because it's the only way they've ever known to feel worthy. But when that illusion breaks, something extraordinary begins. The real self starts to surface. This is where Jung's teachings become truly revolutionary for empaths. He revealed that each of us carries a shadow, the hidden or rejected aspects of ourselves. Yet for empaths, this shadow conceals something few expect: rage. Pure, unfiltered rage at being used, manipulated, and taken for granted. Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For empaths, that darkness isn't evil. It's their repressed anger, unmet needs, and silenced voice. And when they finally face this shadow, everything changes. The empath who encounters their own darkness doesn't turn cruel. They become what I call consciously selective. They begin to see through the manipulations they once ignored. They recognize emotional vampires. They can tell the difference between real need and manufactured crisis. This isn't cynicism, it's clarity. Jung identified recurring patterns in people undergoing individuation, what I refer to as the 8 signs of conscious awakening. If these sound familiar, you're experiencing what Jung described as the birth of psychological sovereignty. Sign 1. The energy shift. The first sign is what I call the energy reversal. Instead of your life force constantly pouring outward into others, it begins to flow back toward you. Jung saw this clearly in his work. When people stop unconsciously giving their energy away, they suddenly have strength for themselves. You no longer feel drained after every interaction. You stop absorbing others' negativity. Most importantly, you stop feeling guilty for setting boundaries. Jung wrote, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." If you've ever been told you're too sensitive, remind yourself, my sensitivity is my strength. And soon, you'll notice something fascinating. Others sense the change before you do. They feel that you're no longer available to carry their emotional burdens. Some will even try to guilt you back into your old role. Sign 2. The mask falls away. Jung called this the death of the persona, the social mask we wear to survive and fit in. For empaths, this persona usually takes the shape of the kind one, the helpful one, the person who never says no. But once individuation begins, maintaining that mask becomes unbearable. You start speaking your truth instead of saying what others want to hear. You express your real preferences instead of constantly deferring to everyone else. You admit when you're exhausted instead of pretending to have limitless energy. And this unsettles the very people who once benefited from your self-erasure. Jung warned about this stage, noting that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Yet for the awakening empath, self-acceptance soon outweighs the need for social approval. Sign 3. The projection returns. Here, Jung's insights become essential. He discovered that humans often project their own inner qualities onto others. Empaths, in particular, tend to project their depth, sensitivity, and capacity for genuine care onto people who may not possess these traits at all. But during individuation, what I call the projection recall begins. You stop seeing potential and start seeing truth. You no longer excuse toxic behavior. You stop believing everyone is simply misunderstood deep down. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The awakening empath realizes they've long been triggered by selfishness because they had denied their own healthy form of it for so long. Sign 4. Boundaries become sacred. Jung observed that individuals who reach psychological maturity develop what he called a personal relationship with the unconscious. For empaths, this means finally listening to their inner signals rather than external pressures. You start saying no without justification. You stop apologizing for your needs. And you recognize that those who get angry about your boundaries were the ones benefiting from their absence. This isn't selfishness, it's what Jung referred to as individual integrity. The awakening empath discovers something I call sacred selfishness. The realization that caring for yourself isn't indulgence, it's the foundation of every genuine relationship. Sign 5. The guilt disappears. This might be the most surprising shift of all. The crushing guilt empaths carry for needing rest, taking space, or disappointing others starts to fade. Jung called this process the integration of the shadow. When you stop rejecting parts of yourself, you stop feeling guilty simply for being human. You begin to recognize that guilt was often a learned reaction, a form of emotional control from others. So when someone says, "You've changed," in that disappointed tone, you no longer rush to comfort them. You think, "Yes, I have," and that's exactly the point. Jung wrote, "The individual has always been unconscious of himself and has remained so." But the awakening empath becomes aware of their worth, independent of anyone's validation. Sign 6. Authenticity over approval. Through individuation, Jung said, we reach self-actualization, living from our authentic core instead of performing for acceptance. For empaths, this means choosing truth over approval, even when it costs relationships. You stop pretending to feel emotions you don't. You stop agreeing to avoid tension. You stop laughing at jokes that don't resonate just to make others comfortable. This newfound authenticity draws some people closer while driving others away. If people began treating you differently once you found your voice, it's because they felt the shift before you announced it. The awakening empath begins to embody what I call authentic magnetism. When you no longer chase approval, you naturally attract those who align with your truth. Sign 7. The healer heals themselves. Jung observed that many healers are wounded healers, people who help others to escape their own unhealed pain. But through individuation, empaths turn their healing energy inward for the first time. You start asking, "What do I need?" instead of, "What does everyone else need?" You begin caring for your own inner child rather than parenting every struggling adult around you. You finally realize you can't pour from an empty cup, and yours has been empty for far too long. Jung reminded us, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And for the awakening empath, that journey means finally discovering who they are beyond the role of the constant caretaker. Sign 8. Conscious connection. The final sign is what Jung described as conscious relationship, the ability to connect with others deeply, yet never lose yourself in the process. The awakening empath begins to cultivate what I call boundaried compassion. They still feel deeply for others, but no longer absorb their emotions. You start attracting people who honor your boundaries instead of exploiting your kindness. Your relationships evolve into connections built on mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. You learn to love others without feeling the need to rescue them. If you've reached a place where you can understand people but no longer crave their approval, declare, "I see you, but I don't need you." Jung observed that individuation leads to deeper, more authentic relationships because, for the first time, you're relating from your true self, not the mask you once wore. But Jung never romanticized this process. He called it the Night Sea Journey, a dark passage of confusion and loss necessary for rebirth. For empaths, this stage often feels like a kind of death. And in many ways, it is the death of the false self built around pleasing and pacifying others. You might lose friends who only valued the version of you that served their needs. You might experience loneliness as you learn how to truly be with yourself. You may grieve relationships that, you now realize, were founded not on love, but on your usefulness. Jung wrote, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." The awakening empath must journey into their own psychological underworld before rising into genuine selfhood. Jung was also one of the earliest psychologists to emphasize the deep link between mind and body. For empaths, years of carrying other people's emotions creates what I call energetic toxicity, manifesting as chronic fatigue, anxiety, digestive distress, or even autoimmune disorders. But when an empath stops people-pleasing, the healing begins. The nervous system finally exhales. Sleep becomes restful. Chronic tension softens. Jung understood that psychological and physical healing are inseparable. Your body was never meant to process the emotional waste of the world. Once you stop being everyone else's emotional landfill, your body naturally starts to restore itself. Individuation also reshapes relationships. Some deepen, others dissolve. For empaths, this sorting process, what I call the Great Relationship Purge, can be painful but profoundly necessary. Those who truly love you will adapt to your growth and respect your boundaries. Those who resist your evolution were likely benefiting from your lack of self-care. Jung described this as the difference between genuine love and neurotic attachment. Through this process, you'll uncover many unspoken contracts that governed your old relationships. You provided endless emotional support, and they offered conditional acceptance in return. When you end that agreement and reclaim your own life, some people will leave. Let them. Here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. When empaths stop absorbing everyone's emotions, they don't lose their sensitivity, they refine it. They develop what I call conscious sensitivity. They still feel deeply, but they decide what to take in and what to release. This becomes their superpower. They can sense the truth of a situation without being consumed by it. They can help without draining themselves. They can love fully without dissolving into the other person. Jung called this differentiated consciousness, the ability to stay centered while remaining deeply connected. The awakening empath becomes what Jung described as a conscious individual, someone who moves through the world with open sensitivity and unshakable boundaries. Jung believed that individual transformation sparks collective change. When one person becomes conscious, it gives others permission to awaken too. The empath who stops people-pleasing doesn't just transform their own life. They become a living example of another way to exist. Your courage to hold boundaries gives others courage to set theirs. Your refusal to absorb everyone's emotions teaches them they can handle their own. Your honest self-expression reminds them they don't have to perform to be loved. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But this transformation only happens when at least one person shows up authentically. Jung outlined guiding principles for those who achieve individuation, what I call the conscious empath's code. These are the 5 foundations of psychological sovereignty that keep you connected yet self-contained. Feel everything, absorb nothing. Your emotions are yours, theirs belong to them. Give from overflow, never from depletion. Love others without losing yourself. Help when inspired, not when guilty. Trust your inner knowing over external pressure. These aren't rigid rules. They're living principles for maintaining what Jung called authentic being in a world that profits from your unconsciousness. Jung understood why society often labels self-awareness as selfishness, because those who remain asleep depend on others' self-neglect. When empaths start prioritizing their own needs, they're frequently accused of becoming cold or distant. But Jung made a crucial distinction. There's healthy selfishness and unhealthy selfishness. Healthy selfishness means taking full responsibility for your own happiness instead of expecting others to provide it. It's the difference between boundaries and barriers, between self-care and self-abandonment. The awakening empath finally understands that caring for oneself isn't an act of selfishness, it's an act of survival. You can't give from an empty cup, and most empaths have been running on empty for far too long. Jung's concept of individuation includes what he called the inner marriage, the union of the masculine and feminine psychological principles within one person. For empaths, this balance means learning to pair their natural receptivity with healthy assertiveness. You begin to receive energy as easily as you give it. You learn to say no with the same grace as yes. You integrate your nurturing nature with your independent spirit. Jung described this harmony as psychological wholeness, the state where you no longer depend on another person to complete you because you've learned how to complete yourself. The awakening empath discovers they can be both gentle and powerful, compassionate yet boundaried, deeply sensitive yet fully sovereign. Jung recognized that highly sensitive people possess extraordinary gifts, once they learn to manage their sensitivity with awareness. I call this the empath's arsenal, the natural abilities that emerge when sensitivity is guided rather than suppressed. Your intuition becomes laser-sharp when it's no longer clouded by other people's emotions. Your creativity flows effortlessly when your energy isn't being drained by emotional vampires. Your relationships grow deeper and more meaningful when you attract people who match your authenticity instead of exploiting your kindness. Jung wrote, "Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart." The conscious empath develops a kind of inner sight that pierces through pretense and illusion, revealing truth beneath appearances. Jung also noted that individuation often brings a phase of solitude, a separation from the unconscious dynamics of the collective. For empaths, this can feel profoundly isolating. You've spent a lifetime surrounded by people who needed you, and now you're learning how to simply be with yourself. But Jung made a crucial distinction between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the pain of disconnection from others. Solitude is the joy of connection with yourself. The awakening empath learns to cherish their own company for the first time. In solitude, you can finally hear your own thoughts without the interference of others' emotions. You start to discover your true preferences without the pressure of external expectations. You meet yourself, perhaps for the very first time. But Jung's process of individuation doesn't end in retreat from the world. It leads back to conscious re-engagement. The awakened empath eventually returns to relationships and community, but this time from a place of freedom, not compulsion. You help others because you want to, not because you feel guilty. You socialize out of genuine desire for connection, not fear of rejection. You share your gifts from a sense of inner abundance, not from the desperate need to be needed. Jung called this conscious participation, showing up in life as your authentic self, not your performing self. He also understood that growth is not linear. It unfolds in cycles. The awakening empath will continually revisit lessons, facing new challenges as they strengthen their boundaries and deepen their authenticity. There will be moments of doubt, times when old patterns whisper for your return. But each cycle expands your awareness. Each trial reinforces your clarity. Every boundary you uphold makes the next one easier. Jung called this spiral development, a process of returning to familiar themes at higher levels of consciousness each time, refining your self-awareness with every turn. The key is to recognize these repeating cycles as signs of evolution, not as proof of failure. Jung taught that true individuation brings with it a sense of responsibility. When you begin to heal yourself, you naturally feel drawn to help others heal too. But for the conscious empath, that help looks very different from the old, self-erasing patterns of people-pleasing. Instead of rescuing others, you model healthy boundaries. Instead of absorbing their pain, you hold compassionate space for their growth. Instead of fixing their problems, you trust their ability to find their own way. This is what Jung called authentic service, helping from wholeness rather than from woundedness. You become like a lighthouse, offering steady light to those ready to awaken, but never chasing ships lost in the dark. Jung's ultimate goal was what he called the self, not the ego or the social mask, but the integrated totality of who you truly are. For empaths, reaching this integration means embracing every facet of their being. The soft and the strong, the nurturing and the fierce, the giver and the receiver. You no longer apologize for feeling deeply. You stop hiding your intuitive gifts. You embrace your complexity instead of shrinking to fit simple labels. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." The integrated empath embodies this truth. They are both powerful and gentle, open yet boundaried, connected yet sovereign. So here's what's important to remember. Your sensitivity is not a weakness, it's your greatest strength. Your boundaries are not selfish, they are acts of self-respect. Your authenticity isn't too much, it's exactly right. Jung dedicated his life to studying the process of becoming whole, and he found that it always demands courage. The courage to disappoint others rather than betray yourself. The courage to stand alone rather than compromise your values. The courage to choose growth over comfort. If you see yourself reflected in these 8 signs, then you are already walking the path Jung charted more than a century ago. Trust the process. Trust your intuition. Trust that becoming your truest self is not only your birthright, it's your responsibility. If you recognize these transformations in yourself, affirm it with this: my breaking point became my breakthrough. Because when an empath stops pleasing everyone and starts seeing the truth, they don't become selfish, they become sovereign. They don't lose compassion, they finally include themselves in it. They don't stop caring about others, they begin caring for themselves, too. This is Jung's enduring gift to every empath weary of carrying the emotional weight of the world. You don't need to suffer to prove your goodness. You don't need to sacrifice yourself to be worthy of love. You can be both sensitive and strong, both caring and boundaried, both empathic and authentic. The world doesn't need more exhausted, depleted empaths. It needs conscious ones. Empaths who give from choice, not compulsion. Who help from fullness, not emptiness. Who love deeply without abandoning themselves. If you want to explore more about Jung's psychology of the sovereign individual, watch my video, Why the Man Who Needs Nothing is Society's Greatest Threat, where I dive into how psychological independence challenges systems built on dependence. Your journey from people pleaser to conscious empath isn't just personal, it's revolutionary. And Jung would be proud. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.